2024 is nearly over, and it's time to reflect on what has been one of the most eventful years in Bitcoin's history. Today we're going to be doing a roundup to discuss how Bitcoin has performed throughout 2024, and where better to start than the monthly returns heat map chat we have here on bitcoinmagazinepro.com. And as we can see, 2024 has been pretty good for Bitcoin. We've had some pretty boring, choppy consolidationary periods. We've had a few very negative months, but overall we're up 121.32% as I film this. So ultimately, we can't complain. It's been an exceptional year for Bitcoin's price appreciation, and alongside that, just its fundamental and macro factors as well. But ultimately, yeah, just in terms of raw price action, things are looking good. But obviously, there's been some pretty massive events that we need to discuss. So just again, quickly discussing on the price action point of view, if we just compare our current cycle to the previous two cycles, we can see that we're pretty much right in line with where we'd expect to be. In fact, probably a bit better than where many expected us to be, considering we've seen diminishing returns over the previous few cycles. We're actually still outperforming the 2015 to 2018 Bitcoin cycle, which is pretty amazing considering we've grown from just a few billion-dollar asset to a multi-trillion-dollar asset class, and we're still providing close to 500% returns since our cycle lows at around $15,000 last year. So plenty of upside to go according to this as well. But like I said, some pretty notable events that we need to discuss. First and foremost is the Bitcoin ETF approval, which happened earlier this year in January 2024. And it was the most successful ETF launch ever. What we've seen is these institutional inflows surpassing billions and billions of dollars, over $60 billion. This does negate the GBTC outflows that we've seen, which may cause the net inflows to be slightly close towards $40 billion. But overall, again, this has been unprecedented in terms of ETF launches to see such a massive positive reaction, which ultimately drove Bitcoin to a new all-time high at around $73,000 in around March this year, before we had that pretty long, boring, choppy consolidationary period. But even throughout that, these ETF institutional players were accumulating, and especially as we rallied to above six figures into that $100,000 region, we've seen this go absolutely parabolic to the upside as institutional, large, sophisticated investors are scrambling to accumulate as much BTC as possible, amounting to over 1 billion Bitcoin that have been accumulated. We can see, if I just zoom in, just so we can see this data point, it peaked at close to 1.01 million Bitcoin they've accumulated. And there's no indication that this is going to be slowing down. Obviously, it's cyclical, it doesn't rise constantly, but we can see this trend is definitely to the upside, and it would not surprise me one bit to see throughout 2025 and beyond this number to continue growing substantially. And the best part is these institutional players are well aware of the macroeconomic conditions, the fundamental economics of BTC. These are probably not speculative players who are going to buy and sell on a daily or weekly basis. A huge amount of this Bitcoin is going to be bought and likely not seen again for years, if not decades. So this is going to further contribute to the illiquidity of BTC and hopefully again contribute to even more positive price action going forward. But it's not just ETF institutional investors. What we've seen is companies like MicroStrategy accumulating Bitcoin like it's going out of fashion, currently holding over 444,000 Bitcoin, over 2% of the supply of BTC. And along with that, we've seen similar accumulation, not to the same extent, but again, aggressive buying from Marathon, Galaxy, Tesla. Well, they still hold from a few years ago. But either way, we've seen a huge amount of accumulation from large publicly listed companies, which again reiterates how Bitcoin can look going forward when it's not only retail players like it has been for the previous few cycles, but now we're seeing institutional players, publicly traded companies, and nation states continuing to accumulate like crazy. I know, again, El Salvador has been involved in BTC for a number of years now, but this year alone they've accumulated hundreds more BTC, accumulating pretty much every single day, I believe. And it's now over 6,000 BTC strong, valued at well over $500 million. So again, this all just reaffirms Bitcoin is here to stay. It is a store of value asset that doesn't just appeal to speculators and retail investors, but now everyone is getting involved. The largest players on earth are now wanting to buy BTC. But what we can say is that this hasn't necessarily made Bitcoin a unique asset in terms of its price action. What we can see is if we just look at the Bitcoin correlation to the S&P 500 over the past year, we can see that these two have been moving very much in tandem. Bitcoin's correlation with US equities remains incredibly strong, and unfortunately we haven't seen any evidence of a true decoupling yet. A decoupling being an extended period of time where Bitcoin runs on its own. It doesn't matter what equities or other markets are doing. It's its own unique asset. Unfortunately, we haven't really seen any sustained evidence that that has come to fruition. Currently, we are pretty much just mirroring the S&P 500 in terms of price action. But like we said, now that we're seeing these institutional, sovereign, publicly listed companies, and of course these retail whales that still hold a vast majority of Bitcoin, maybe now the market dynamics are going to change somewhat and we can become a bit more of a unique asset. One more interesting point to note is we have actually had an incredibly strong correlation with gold as well. Obviously, Bitcoin's had this narrative of being a digital gold for some time now, but we have been way more correlated to the US equity markets in particular. But we have seen, again, a bit more of a stronger correlation with gold over the past year. But of course, if we've got a strong correlation with gold and equities, it's not like we're following one or the other. Everything's kind of just doing the same thing. And this is mainly just due to the fact that we've not had the most favorable macroeconomic conditions, which, if anything, gives Bitcoin even more credence to how impressive and how strong this rally has been. Looking at macroeconomic conditions such as the federal funds target rate, we've only just seen this begin to start pivoting to the downside after an extended period throughout pretty much most of 2024 with incredibly high target rates, up surpassing 5%. And alongside that, we've seen bonds struggling, we've seen the dollar strength continue to rally, and just like we said, a little bit of political uncertainty as we've had a US election, but that maybe plays into even more bullishness going into 2025. Obviously, we've seen rumors of a US strategic reserve and whatnot, but we'll discuss what we could see in the next year for Bitcoin in the video we'll post in a couple days' time. But moving on from that, we've had another substantial event this year, which was the Bitcoin halving event, which saw the BTC block reward decrease from 6.25 BTC to 3.125. Essentially, the inflation rate of Bitcoin has now been cut by 50% as it does every 4 years. Now Bitcoin is officially the hardest asset on earth with an inflation rate considerably lower than that of gold. And now that we've got about 94% of all BTC in circulation, again, this is just playing more and more into the dynamics of the illiquidity of BTC. And especially as we're seeing demand continuing to grow, it's really just a matter of time before we see supply and demand in action. But what we can see is looking at not just the Puel multiple, but a lot of other on-chain metrics as well. Without giving too many spoilers, what we're going to talk about in the video in a couple days' time, which is going to be a 2025 outlook, is we still have substantial room to the upside. The Puel multiple, which is looking at the daily revenue of Bitcoin miners in USD denomination compared to the previous 365-day average. We had this big drop-off as the halving happened and block rewards were cut by 50% pretty much overnight. And then from there, we had this choppy consolidation period where Bitcoin usually has this post-halving cool-off period before we've now rallied to new all-time highs. And hopefully now we can enter this exponential phase of the cycle. And what we can see is because we've had this halving event, where the block reward and inflation rate has been cut, this hasn't deterred Bitcoin miners. If anything, the market and network is looking stronger and more secure than ever before. Even in the face of boring price action and reduced block rewards, hash rate has just continued to skyrocket, which again plays into the fundamental strength of BTC as a network, not just as a store of value, financial asset for big institutional players. This is a network that is being secured and being utilized, and it really shows into Bitcoin's potential going forward. One thing we have seen over pretty much all of 2024, if I just isolate this metric here, this is the 1 year hodl wave. We have seen this pretty much continuously decline throughout 2024 as we peaked above 70% in late 2023. We started this year again probably about flat on this metric. If I move about this way, you might be able to see it a bit clearer, but we have pretty much non-stop declined in this as we have seen a lot of longer term holders of BTC potentially begin cashing out. Now, there is a little bit of an argument that many of these may have been cashing out to rotate into ETFs or other products that may be more tax efficient or just a little less stressful if they're not big fans of self-custody. But ultimately, we are seeing people begin taking some profit. It makes sense. We started this year out at about $38,000-ish, I believe it was. And since then, we've rallied to over $108,000. So we've obviously seen some great positive price action. It makes sense that people that may have bought Bitcoin at just a few $100s are going to start scaling out a little bit. But this isn't a negative. If we zoom out here, we can see there is substantial room to go in terms of BTC changing hands from longer term participants to new market entrants. So really, this is just playing into where we should be in this market cycle. Everything looks healthy, everything looks incredibly bullish going forward, and 2024 looks pretty much how we'd expected it to look. Very bullish, if anything, a little bit more bullish. And I think one other chart we should definitely be watching, if I just go here to see the year-to-date price action of BTC. As we said, we started at around $40,000. We had a yearly low of around $38,500 before we rallied to above $108,000. Of course, a vast majority of the year was, let's be frank, pretty boring. Bitcoin from around March, when it set its all-time high at $73,000, had a multi-month period of choppy consolidation up until March time before we set a new all-time high, where price just kind of slowly grinded to the downside, and it was really boring. What we can do is, if we just add on the golden ratio multiplier here, we can see that this has been probably one of the cleanest and easiest metrics to be watching. Well, we could have been watching over the past year. We were watching over the past year, and we should continue watching it going forward, as it is called the Bitcoin highs and lows pretty much to perfection. As we entered 2024, we were already at this 1.6 accumulation high band on the golden ratio multiplier, where we were experiencing some resistance before we rallied to this red 2x line on this golden ratio, which marked our previous all-time high, before again we had some support, flipped into resistance on this 1.6, dipped again into this 350-day moving average before we rallied once again higher to this 1.6 level line. And what we can see is this 1.6 is currently at around $107,000, and above that, the red 2x line, which is maybe where we could see Bitcoin topping out this cycle, is around $134,000 currently, but continuing to rise. So this is definitely one chart and one indicator I'll be continuing to watch going forward, given how accurate it was in 2024. But ultimately, things look pretty good. 2024 has been a great year for BTC. Also, if you haven't already, please don't forget to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications to ensure you're receiving all of our content as soon as it's released. And make sure to check out all the resources we've discussed today, as well as the many more that are all available on bitcoinmagazinepro.com, your number one source for Bitcoin analysis. So just to summarize, 2024 has been an exceptional year for Bitcoin, with over 120% returns as price rallied from our yearly low of around $38,500 to a new all-time high into six-figure territory above $108,000. It wasn't that long ago that Bitcoin was just trading at a few dollars, then a few $100s, and now we're into the $100,000 territory. Pretty crazy to think about the astronomical growth we've seen in such a short space of time. And along with that, we've seen the most successful ETF launch in history, as institutional investors accumulated over 1 million Bitcoin. And alongside that, we've seen publicly listed companies such as MicroStrategy and even nations such as El Salvador continue to buy as much BTC as possible. And with the BTC halving event cutting block rewards from 6.25 to 3.125 BTC, we can see the illiquidity of BTC continuing. And with all this demand continuing to grow, it's just some simple supply and demand economics. Hash rate is skyrocketing as well. Pretty much everything that could be looking bullish is looking incredibly bullish. There's no indication that Bitcoin has peaked just yet, and there's every indication that 2025 is going to be just as, if not even more bullish than 2024. If you like this video, then please visit bitcoinmagazinepro.com, where our analytics help you to cut through the noise to make informed, data-driven decisions about Bitcoin. With over 150 live charts, personalized indicator alerts, in-depth crypto industry reports, API access, and more, all for a fraction of the standard industry price. And let me know what your thoughts are on how Bitcoin performed throughout 2024, and if you're just as bullish throughout 2025, and where maybe you could see Bitcoin topping out in terms of price and timing-wise as well. And also, if you haven't, don't forget to subscribe to the site. We do have a temporary New Year deal, which would provide you 30% off a site subscription. So definitely don't miss out on that. It's not going to last too much longer. Let me know your thoughts down below and on social media. I look forward to reading and replying to them. Thank you all very much for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.